She said it the way people say things they never expect to answer for. Casually, with the full weight of certainty behind it, and not a single ounce of doubt. "I would never marry a man like you." And she said it in front of his daughter. 5 years later, that sentence would be the only thing she could hear every time she closed her eyes. But on the day she said it, standing in a hallway on the 42nd floor of a building that bore her bank's name, she believed she was simply stating the obvious. The man she said it to did not flinch. He did not raise his voice. He did not even look away. He stood in the corridor holding his 6-year-old daughter's hand, a Tupperware container leaking a thin curl of steam from its loosely sealed lid, and he waited. She had blocked the hallway with her body, not dramatically. She had simply stopped walking and refused to move, and because she stood between the elevator and the door to suite 4200, the man and the girl had nowhere to go. She looked at his shoes first, then the backpack on the girl's shoulder, the one with duct tape holding the left strap together. Then back at him. "I need to see identification," she said. "This is a private floor." The girl shifted her weight from one foot to the other. She held the Tupperware carefully, the way a child holds something she has been trusted with. A drop of broth slipped from the edge and landed on the marble. The man reached into his jacket pocket slowly, not out of fear, out of practice. He knew what speed looked like to a person who had already made up her mind about what she was seeing. The woman raised her phone, not to her ear, to the camera. "I am calling security," she said. "You do not belong on this floor." He said nothing. He held his ID badge in his right hand, low, visible, but not offered. His daughter pressed closer to his leg. The Tupperware tilted again. And then the woman looked at his badge, looked at the child, and said the sentence that would follow her for 5 years. "I would never marry a man like you," she said. "I feel sorry for whatever woman did." The elevator opened behind them. A man in a navy suit stepped out carrying a leather portfolio. He stopped when he saw the scene. Then he looked at the man with the child and his entire expression changed. "Nate," he said, "we have been waiting for you upstairs. The board is ready." The woman's phone was still raised. Her thumb was still on the record button. She did not lower it, not yet. But her mouth opened, and nothing came out. And in that silence, the girl tugged her father's hand and whispered something about the soup getting cold. "Before we go any further, I need you to do something. Drop your city in the comments below. Tell me where you are watching from. And if this story hits you the way I think it will, subscribe and ring that bell. Because what this man was actually doing on that floor, what that woman was standing next to without knowing it, that part of the story is still coming. And it is worth staying for." Nathan Dwyer made eggs the same way every morning. 2. Scrambled soft in a cast iron pan that had belonged to his wife's grandmother. The pan was heavy and uneven, with a small chip on the rim that caught the spatula if he moved too quickly. He seasoned them with nothing but salt and a half teaspoon of smoked paprika, which was not something he would have ever thought to put on eggs before Simone taught him. Simone had taught him a lot of things about food. That garlic should be sliced, not pressed. That butter in a hot pan tells you when it is ready by the sound it makes. That feeding a child is not a task, but a language. And the dialect you choose in the first 5 years is the one they will hear for the rest of their life. Simone had been dead for 4 years. She died on a Tuesday in the cardiology ward at Johns Hopkins, 19 days after a diagnosis the doctors called rare and aggressive. Hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. Nathan, a man who understood complex systems better than most people alive, could not make sense of it no matter how many times he read the literature. She was 31. Zola was 2. There had been no warning. Simone had run 3 miles the Saturday before the diagnosis. She had signed up for a half marathon in Annapolis. She had been talking about teaching Zola to swim that summer. He did not talk about it. Not at dinner parties, not on the phone with the people who called to check in during that first year and then quietly stopped. What remained of Simone in the apartment on Calvert Street was not a shrine. It was a kitchen. It was the paprika. It was the way Zola held her spoon pinched between the thumb and the side of her index finger, exactly the way Simone had held a pen. It was a single photograph on the refrigerator, held by a magnet from a crab house in Fells Point, showing Simone on the front steps of their first apartment in Federal Hill, holding a cup of something and laughing at whoever stood behind the camera. And it was the fact that Nathan filled 2 mugs of coffee every morning and let one sit on the counter until it grew cold, then poured it down the drain. He did this without thinking about it, every day for 4 years. If anyone had asked him why, he would not have had an answer that made sense. The ritual was not for sense. It was for the part of his morning that still included her. His weekday routine had the precision of a man who cannot afford to forget anything, because there is no one to catch what he drops. Alarm at 5:30. Coffee at 5:45, both mugs. Eggs by 6:10. Zola's lunch packed by 6:30, always the same rotation. Turkey and cheese on Monday and Wednesday, peanut butter and apple slices on Tuesday and Thursday, and on Friday, whatever was left in the refrigerator assembled with the kind of optimism that only a single parent can bring to an almost empty produce drawer. He braided Zola's hair on mornings when she asked, which was most mornings, learned from a video Simone's sister had sent him in the first month after the funeral. He was not good at it. Zola never said so. Nathan Dwyer had a doctorate in organizational systems from Carnegie Mellon. He had spent 3 years at McKinsey before leaving for government work, and for the past 7 years he had held a position at the office of the comptroller of the currency that most people, including his neighbors, could not describe even if they read the title aloud. Senior Examiner, Large Bank Supervision. He reviewed the internal risk frameworks of the 6 largest financial institutions in the United States. He read documents that boards of directors had not read. He understood leverage ratios the way a surgeon understands anatomy, not as theory, but as the architecture that holds everything together or lets everything collapse. He was not important the way people imagine important to look. He drove a 2017 Honda Accord with a dent above the rear left wheel well. He packed Zola's lunch every morning in a bag with a faded dinosaur print. He wore a navy blazer he had owned for 9 years. His shoes were clean but not expensive. He carried a leather satchel that Simone had given him on their 3rd anniversary, the stitching on the strap coming loose, and he would not replace it. He dropped Zola at Barclay Elementary at 7:48 every morning. Kissed the top of her head. She said the same thing every day. "Bye, Daddy, make the numbers be good today." She did not know what he did. She knew it involved numbers, that he stayed up very late sometimes, that there were phone calls he took in the bathroom with the door closed and the fan running. She knew he was tired. She knew that on some mornings the second coffee mug sat on the counter longer than usual. Nathan's immediate supervisor was a woman named Claudia Reese, who had been at the OC for 22 years and who had, in 2019, personally recruited Nathan out of McKinsey with a phone call that lasted 11 minutes. It ended with her saying, "I do not need you to be impressive. I need you to be right. And I need you to be right quietly." Nathan never forgot that sentence. It had described the entire architecture of his professional life. Claudia was the one who called him at 9:14 on a Wednesday in March, 4 months before the hallway confrontation, and told him what was coming. "We have a problem with Atlantic Union," she said. "It is not the kind of problem that gets better." Nathan listened. He asked 3 questions, each more specific than the last. He wrote nothing down. He did not need to. He had been reading Atlantic Union's filings for 2 years. He knew their commercial real estate exposure was a bloated fiction. He knew their Tier 1 capital ratio was being maintained through a reclassification trick that 3 other banks had tried and abandoned. He knew that the bank's CEO, a woman named Vivian Fairchild, had personally approved a series of loan modifications that existed primarily to delay the recognition of losses. He knew all of this because it was his job to know it, and because he had been documenting it page by page, file by file, in a secure system that only 4 people in the federal government had access to. What Nathan did not know yet was that Vivian Fairchild lived in his building. The Worthington was a 12-story residential building on the edge of Mount Vernon in Baltimore, converted from a textile warehouse in 2006. It attracted a particular kind of resident, lawyers at firms that had been around since before the war. Retired Hopkins professors, 1 federal judge, and the CEO of a regional bank that controlled $9 billion in assets. Nathan had moved in because the school district was right, the rent was manageable for a federal employee also paying for after-school care, and the building had a laundry room on every floor, which mattered when you had a 6-year-old who could go through 3 outfits on a Saturday. He had lived there for 2 years before the problems started. And the problems all came from the same source. Vivian Fairchild had built her life on a single principle. She knew who belonged and who did not. She had been CEO of Atlantic Union for 11 years. She sat on the board of the Baltimore Symphony. She had raised 2 sons who attended Gilman, and when her husband died in 2018, she mourned him publicly and precisely, demonstrating both grief and composure, which are the 2 qualities that powerful people believe make them admirable. She was not stupid. She was not uneducated. She had an MBA from Wharton and a reputation for operational discipline that was, in certain circles, genuinely respected. She had grown up in Ruxton, the daughter of a man who managed bond portfolios for T. Rowe Price, and a mother who sat on 3 nonprofit boards and never once raised her voice in public. Vivian learned early that the world was organized, that organization was a form of virtue, and that the people who maintained the organization deserved to benefit from it. She had never examined this belief. She had never needed to. Every institution she had ever entered confirmed it. What she was, and what she had always been, was a person who understood the world through categories and assigned value based on where a person fit within them. She had never once been forced to confront the possibility that her categories were wrong. Nathan Dwyer did not fit. She first saw him in the lobby on a Tuesday in September. He was carrying Zola on his hip because the girl had fallen asleep in the car. A grocery bag in his other hand, his badge clipped to his belt. She did not notice the badge. She noticed the jacket, the shoes, the child, the duct tape on the backpack strap. She made a calculation so fast and so practiced she was not even aware she was making it. She said nothing that day. But the following week, she asked the building manager a question. Who approved the tenant in 4C? The building manager, a man named Gerald, who had been running the Worthington for 14 years, told her it was a standard application, passed credit and background, paid first and last. Vivian asked if the man had references from previous landlords. He did. 3. Vivian asked nothing else. But something had started, a small mechanical process, like a gear engaging without sound. She had placed Nathan Dwyer into a category, and the category was wrong, and because she had never had reason to question her categories, the wrongness would compound for 2 years before it broke. Over the next several months, Vivian Fairchild filed 4 noise complaints against Unit 4C, each one specific enough to sound credible and vague enough to be impossible to verify. Excessive noise after 9 p.m. Cooking odors in the hallway. A child running in the corridor. A package left in the shared vestibule for more than 24 hours. Nathan received each complaint in a manila envelope slid under his door. He read each one. Filed each one in a folder in his desk. Responded to none. On one occasion, Vivian stopped him in the parking garage. She stood between his car and the elevator door, handbag over one arm, key fob in her hand. "I want you to know," she said, "that the board is reviewing your lease. There have been concerns." Nathan looked at her. His keys were in his hand. Zola was in the car. "Thank you for letting me know," he said. He walked around her. She did not step aside. He walked around her the way water moves around a stone, opened the elevator, went upstairs, made dinner, and did not mention it. He did not mention it because he could not. Not because the words were too difficult, but because 7 weeks earlier, Claudia Reese had called him into a secure briefing room in Washington and told him something that changed the architecture of his next 18 months. "Nathan," she said, "Atlantic Union CEO is your neighbor. You understand what that means." He understood. It meant he could not acknowledge Vivian Fairchild, could not engage with her, could not correct her assumptions or defend himself against her complaints, because any interaction, any response that suggested he knew who she was professionally could compromise the examination. It could give her attorney's grounds to claim the review was personal. It could give her an early warning. It could dismantle 3 years of careful documentation. So he said nothing. He absorbed the complaints, accepted the hostility, walked around her in the parking garage and went upstairs and made paprika eggs for his daughter and poured the second cup of coffee down the drain and waited. The waiting was not passivity. The waiting was the most disciplined thing he had ever done. Claudia called every 2 weeks. She never asked how he was holding up. She asked if he had maintained distance, if there had been direct contact that could be characterized as adversarial or personal, if the documentation was current. Nathan always answered the same way. Everything is where it needs to be. Claudia would pause. Then she would say the same thing she always said. "Good, stay quiet. We are almost there." The examination of Atlantic Union Federal Savings had been assigned a case designation, OC 2024 LBs 0047. 4 examiners were involved. Nathan was the lead. The scope covered 3 fiscal years of commercial real estate lending, a series of related party transactions disclosed in footnotes so small they were functionally invisible, and a capital structure that looked solid on paper and was, underneath, held together by the financial equivalent of packing tape and optimism. Nathan worked on it at night, after Zola was asleep. He sat at the kitchen table with files spread across the surface, his laptop open to the secure portal, a glass of water beside him that he refilled 3 times before midnight. It was the same table where he had sat with Simone when they were deciding whether to leave consulting for government. She had been the one who said yes, the one who told him that the work that mattered most was the work nobody saw, and that he was built for it, and that she would rather be married to a man who did invisible important things than a man who did visible unimportant ones. He thought about that sometimes when the files were open and the apartment was quiet and the second mug sat cold on the counter. He thought about what Simone would say about Vivian Fairchild. He knew she would say something precise and devastating, and then she would laugh. And then she would tell him to go back to work. Claudia assigned him a secondary examiner named David Osei, who had been at the OC for 6 years and communicated almost entirely in spreadsheet references. David was meticulous and dry, and had a habit of summarizing entire institutions in a single sentence. Once, during a late call about Atlantic Union's Tier 1 discrepancies, he told Nathan that if this bank were a building, the inspector would condemn it, and the architect would deny knowing who drew the plans. Nathan laughed for the first time in weeks. David knew about the neighbor situation. He was the only person besides Claudia who did. He handled it the way he handled everything. A single sentence delivered without inflection. "You are living inside your own case file," he said. "That is either the most professional thing I have ever seen or the most insane." Nathan said it was probably both. The work continued. The discrepancies deepened. The reclassifications Atlantic Union had used to maintain its capital ratio were not just aggressive. In Nathan's assessment, they were materially misleading. The commercial real estate loans classified as performing were, in many cases, backed by properties whose valuations had not been updated since 2020. The bank was carrying assets at prices that no longer existed. Nathan documented everything. He wrote his findings in the precise, stripped-down language that federal examiners use when they know their work will eventually be read by attorneys on both sides. He did not editorialize. He did not speculate. He stated what the numbers showed and what they did not show, and where the gap between those two things had been filled with decisions that could not be explained by anything except the desire to avoid the truth for as long as possible. He submitted his preliminary findings to Claudia in January. She read them in one sitting and called him the next morning. "This is a consent order," she said. "Maybe worse. We need to schedule the board notification." The board notification was the moment the OC formally informed a bank's board of directors that enforcement action was being considered. In the life of a bank CEO, it was the beginning of the end. It was scheduled for a Thursday in July. Nathan would be present. The meeting would take place at Atlantic Union's headquarters, floors 40 through 43 of the Transamerica building in downtown Baltimore. That was the day his daughter asked if she could bring soup. She had watched him make it the night before, a lentil recipe Simone had clipped from a magazine and taped inside a cabinet door. Zola decided the soup should go to work with her father because, in her words, "You always eat the bad sandwich." Nathan put the soup in a Tupperware container that did not seal properly. He drove to the Transamerica building. He took the elevator to the 42nd floor. He was holding his daughter's hand because it was a teacher workday and the after-school program was closed. He had not been able to find alternate care, and Claudia had told him to bring her. "Bring Zola," she said. "There is a conference room with a window. She can draw," and that was how Nathan Dwyer, senior examiner of the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, ended up standing in a hallway on the 42nd floor of the Transamerica building, holding his daughter's hand and a container of lentil soup, while the CEO of the bank he was about to bring under federal enforcement action stood in front of him and told him she would never marry a man like him. She did not know who he was. She did not know that the man she was blocking had spent 3 years reading her bank's most closely held documents. She did not know that the girl with the broken backpack strap was the daughter of the person who had found every number Vivian had buried. She knew only what she saw. And what she saw confirmed everything she had already decided. The man in the navy suit who stepped off the elevator was James Alderman, Deputy Comptroller for Large Bank Supervision. He had flown in from Washington that morning. He was Nathan's supervisor's supervisor, and he had been reading Nathan's reports for 6 months. When he stepped off that elevator and saw Nathan standing in a hallway being filmed by the woman whose bank was about to receive a federal consent order, his face did not show anger. It showed something quieter and worse. The look of a person watching someone do harm without knowing they are doing it to themselves. "Nate," he said, "we have been waiting for you upstairs. The board is ready." Nathan nodded. He did not look at Vivian. He walked past her the way he always walked past her. Zola held his hand. The Tupperware tilted. They went through the glass doors and down the corridor into a conference room where 4 other federal examiners were already seated. Nathan set the soup on the table, opened his satchel, and took out the file that contained 3 years of Vivian Fairchild's worst decisions. Zola sat by the window with a sketchbook. She drew a picture of a cat with extremely long legs. She did not know what was happening in the next room. She knew only that her father was talking to people in serious voices, that the soup was getting cold, and that the cat she was drawing needed a hat. The notification lasted 2 hours. Nathan presented the findings. He walked the board through the capital structure, the reclassifications, the commercial real estate valuations, the related party transactions. He spoke the way he always spoke, quietly, precisely, without emphasis on the words that carried the most weight. The weight was in the numbers. The numbers did not need his voice to be loud. Vivian Fairchild sat at the head of the table. She did not speak for the first 40 minutes. She looked at the projections, the data, the man presenting it, and somewhere around the 30-minute mark, something in her posture changed. Her back, which had been straight, softened, her hands, which had been folded, separated. She placed one palm flat on the table, the way a person does when they are trying to feel something solid beneath them. She recognized him. The jacket first. Then the satchel with the loose stitching. Then the face. And then she understood, in a single unbroken moment, what she had been standing next to in the hallway, in the parking garage, in the lobby, in every complaint she had filed, and every assumption she had made, and every sentence she had spoken to him or about him for 2 years. The meeting ended. The board requested a 30-day response window. Nathan collected his file and walked back to the conference room where Zola was sitting. The cat now had a hat and a scarf and, inexplicably, roller skates. "Daddy," she said, "can we heat the soup now? It has been sitting forever." Nathan picked up the Tupperware. The lid was still not fully sealed. He looked at his daughter and said yes, they could find a microwave, and they walked down the hall together. He did not look back toward the boardroom. He did not need to. 3 weeks later, the consent order was formally issued. Atlantic Union Federal Savings was required to raise $400 million in new capital within 18 months, restructure its commercial lending division, and submit to enhanced quarterly reporting. Vivian Fairchild resigned as CEO 9 days after the order was made public. The Baltimore Sun described the resignation as mutual and expected. Nathan did not read the article. David Osei read it aloud to him over the phone and added his own headline. "Woman discovers neighbor is the reason she no longer has a job," he said. "Film at 11. Nathan told him that was not helpful. David said he was aware. Claudia Reese sent Nathan a formal commendation through the OCC's internal recognition system. It arrived as a PDF attached to an email with the subject line, "Well done, Nate." He read it. Saved it to a folder on his desktop labeled Administrative. Did not print it. Did not frame it. Made dinner. That evening, Zola was sitting on the kitchen floor, sorting a collection of bottle caps she had been accumulating from every soda and juice she had consumed in the past 3 months. She had them organized by color. She looked up at Nathan while he was washing the cast iron pan. "Daddy," she said, "why did that lady in the building always look at us like that?" Nathan turned off the water, dried his hands on the towel hanging from the oven handle. He sat down on the floor next to her. "Some people look at other people and think they already know everything about them," he said. "And sometimes they are wrong." Zola considered this. She picked up a red bottle cap and placed it next to an orange one. Did she know she was wrong? Nathan looked at his daughter. She was holding the bottle cap between her thumb and the side of her index finger, the same way Simone held a pen. "I think she is starting to," he said. Zola nodded, placed the cap in its row. She did not ask another question. Vivian Fairchild drove home from the Transamerica building on the day of the board notification in silence. She did not turn on the radio, did not call her son. She pulled into the parking garage at the Worthington and sat in her car for 11 minutes. She could see Nathan's parking spot from where she sat. The 2017 Accord, with a dent above the rear wheel. The car seat still in the back even though the child was probably too old for one. The kind of thing a parent does when they are not ready to let go of one more stage. She thought about the noise complaints, the cooking odors, the sentence she had said in the hallway of the 42nd floor, the one about never marrying a man like him. She could hear her own voice. She could hear how certain she had sounded. She thought about the look on the girl's face. Not frightened, not confused, just waiting. The child had been waiting the same way her father waited, quietly, without retreat. As if standing still in the presence of someone else's cruelty was something she had already learned how to do, which meant it had happened before, which meant Vivian was not the first person to stand in front of this child and decide, based on nothing, that she and her father did not belong. That thought was the one that stayed. She sat in the car. Engine off. Garage quiet. She thought about the words she had used in the hallway. Marry, she had said she would never marry a man like him. She had taken the most intimate verb she could find and turned it into a weapon, and she had done it in front of his child. The child had heard. The child had said nothing. Nathan Dwyer had said nothing. The silence they offered her was more grace than she had earned or deserved. She put her hands on the steering wheel even though she was not driving anywhere. She held them there. And she understood that the person she had believed herself to be was no longer available to her in quite the same way. She did not cry. She was not the kind of woman who cried in parking garages. But she stayed. Longer than a person stays when they are simply tired. She stayed the way a person stays when they are beginning to understand that beginning to understand is not the same as understanding, and that the distance between those two things is where the rest of her life was going to be. Weeks passed. Nathan's routine did not change. Eggs in the morning. Paprika. The second mug of coffee poured down the drain. Zola dropped off at 7:48. The satchel with the loose stitching carried to the office. The work continued because the work always continued. There was another bank. There was always another bank. David Osei called on a Friday afternoon to tell Nathan that the Atlantic Union case had been cited in a congressional briefing on regional bank oversight. Nathan said that was interesting. David said it was more than interesting, that it was the kind of thing that got you a raise if you worked anywhere other than the federal government. Nathan said David should write a letter. David said he had already written 3, and they had all been filed in a folder almost certainly labeled administrative. Nathan laughed. It was the kind of laugh that comes from knowing someone well enough that the teasing is its own form of loyalty. Claudia called the following Monday. She did not ask about the congressional briefing. She asked if Nathan was sleeping. He said he was sleeping fine. She asked if Zola was doing well. He said she had recently announced that she wanted to be a veterinarian and a chef simultaneously, which he believed would present certain challenges. Claudia said she had no doubt Zola would figure it out. Then she said something she had never said before. I am proud of you, Nate, not for the case, for the hallway, for the parking garage, for all of it. Nathan did not respond right away. He looked out his office window. He thought about Simone, about what it cost to be invisible, about the difference between being seen and being understood. Thank you, Claudia, he said. That was all. On a Saturday morning in September, Nathan heard a knock on his door. He opened it, and Vivian Fairchild was standing in the hallway holding a potted plant. A peace lily, the kind sold at grocery stores, still in the plastic wrapper with the price sticker partially peeled off. She did not smile. She did not give a speech. She held the plant out the way a person holds something when they are not sure it will be accepted. "I had an extra one," she said. "I thought you might want it." Nathan looked at the plant. He looked at the woman holding it. He saw the sticker, the plastic, the way her hands were gripping the pot a little too tightly. He understood exactly what this was and exactly what it was not. He took the plant. "Thank you," he said. "You did not have to do that." Vivian nodded. She opened her mouth as if she was going to say something else. Then she closed it. She turned and walked back down the hallway toward her own door. She did not look back. Zola appeared behind Nathan's leg. She looked at the plant. She looked down the hallway at the woman's retreating back. "Is that the lady?" Nathan looked down at his daughter. "Yes," he said. Zola studied the plant for a moment, reached out and touched one of the leaves, gently, with one finger. "It is a pretty plant," she said, but she left the sticker on. Nathan smiled, not because it was funny, although it was, because his daughter saw exactly what was there. Nothing more and nothing less, and she said it without knowing that what she had said was the most honest assessment of incomplete repentance that anyone in this building had ever offered. He carried the plant inside, set it on the kitchen windowsill, next to the coffee maker, next to the mug he would fill in the morning and let grow cold. That night, after Zola was asleep, Nathan sat at the kitchen table. The files from the next case were already arriving. Another bank. Another set of numbers that did not add up. Another set of decisions made by people who believed they were too important to be wrong. He opened his satchel. The stitching on the strap was worse now. He thought about taking it somewhere to be repaired. Then he did not think about it anymore, because the satchel was from Simone and the loose stitching was just another way of her still being here. He opened the first file, read the first page, picked up his pen, the black Pilot G2 that Simone had once told him was the only pen worth owning. He now bought them in 12 packs from the office supply store on Howard Street because the thought of using any other pen had become, without his permission, a small act of fidelity. The apartment was quiet. The plant sat on the windowsill, its leaves catching the last of the streetlight. The coffee maker was set for 5:45. Zola's lunch bag was already on the counter. The dinosaur print faded almost past recognition but still visible if you knew where to look. Down the hall, Zola was sleeping with one arm thrown above her head, the way Simone used to sleep. Her fingers curled loosely around nothing, as if even in sleep she was holding on to something she would not name. Nathan read the second page. He turned on the small lamp above the table, the one with the crack in the base that he kept meaning to replace and never did. He worked.